With the emergence of a large number of varieties of English all around the world, the issue of standard English in these varieties has emerged alongside. The spread of English around the globe is unmatched by any other language. This unprecedented spread of English is a cause of both elation and concern for the English speaking people or the native speakers of English. It causes them a lot of excitement and happiness that it is such a popular language, that their language is a popular language and people around the world feel proud about using it. But it also gives them a lot of worry. The worry is about the preservation of the standard form of the language. They are worried that when English will spread far and wide and will be used in areas which are located far from the center of the English speaking population, these varieties will develop without having a standard model or native English speaking model to look at for guidance or for learning the rules, etc., for correct use, and this will lead to the decay and disintegration of the original pure form of the language. So we can see that the concern is not about English language generally, because English language is spreading and developing by being used in expanding in outer circle countries. The concern is about the preservation of the standard language, that when these countries in the expanding and outer circle will use English, they may not preserve the regional forms of the standard English, and this way English may decay. So, what is standard English? Standard English is the most original variety of English, which means that it is free of the innovations and varieties which a language adopts when it is going through different periods of development or after being used by a long time by different kinds of people. Different variations and innovations take place in a language. So standard language is the language which is free of all these innovations and variations. It is the most original form of the language, in this case English. So standard English is the most original variety of English. All the other varieties of English are considered deviations of standard English, which means they are deficient in some way, they are not right, they are incorrect. So even if a person is using a variant of a variable, not deliberately making a mistake, not knowing it is a mistake, the supporters of the standard English will consider it a deviation. So in the standard English, innovations and variations are not welcome. This approach, this view, of course, has consequences for the new varieties of English. If the variations and innovations are not welcomed, in fact discouraged, and are considered mistakes, those who use variations, because people who learn or who use English in the outer expanding circle countries, they are not able to use the English in its pure form because of several reasons. One being the distance between their countries and native speaking countries, and the unavailability of models of native speakers. So of course their English will be different from the native English, and if this is the attitude that any variation is considered a mistake, these varieties will not be able to attain the kind of prestige or acceptability which is required of these varieties, or which is required by these varieties. So standard English is actually a set of lexical forms, vocabulary, grammatical rules, etc., which are used in speech and in writing by the educated native speakers. So the vocabulary, the grammar which is used by the not only native speakers but educated native speakers, that variety is considered the standard English. Now, the situation is that even in native English speaking countries, it's a very small minority of people who use this variety. Even in the UK, only 12 to 16% of British population uses the standard variety. So, standard English is associated more closely with language in the written form, language of education taught in schools, universities, colleges, etc., and also used in media and broadcast. So, standard language is used in all these domains of use, more than in everyday language or everyday use. So, one point we must note is that standard English, especially these days, refers more to grammar and vocabulary but not to pronunciation. So, even in these international English tests, for example, IELTS and TOEFL, a lot of allowance is given to the test takers when it comes to evaluating their pronunciation. So, if their pronunciation is intelligible, comprehensible, for example, one can understand what the other person is saying, then not a lot of fuss is made about the pronunciation being completely like that of native speakers. So, standard English refers to grammar and vocabulary, but not so much to pronunciation. It is also the variety which is taught to English as a second language and English as a foreign language students all around the world. Now, we must not misunderstand that when we talk about standard English, we only mean the language which is used by the Queen when she is in the court or when she is conducting a meeting or something. A standard variety of English, the standard variety of English can also have both formal, neutral, and informal styles. Let's take a look at these three examples. The first example is extremely formal. You probably will hardly ever use this kind of vocabulary and structure when you speak normally. So this is highly formal, but this is an example of the use of standard English. The second example is more neutral, the way we talk in everyday life. The third example is quite informal. In fact, we have a swear word in this example, which means that you can use swear words and abusive language even when you speak standard English. So, standard English does not mean that you use a kind of language which is extremely cultured because it is used by educated people. Even in standard English, you can have informal styles. So we can say that the standard English is that dialect or variety of English which commands more prestige than all the other varieties of English. And another important point that we must note is that it's a social and not a regional dialect. So it is not that people who speak language, let's say in the north of England or south of England or east of America, etc., that language is standard English. No, it is not a regional variety. It is the social group that determines the standard or determines the status of the standard English. So it is people in different societies, especially native English speaking societies, the educated people with high prestige, a lot of power, who use this language. So in this way, standard English is not a regional but a social variety.